Today's reading is found in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. These are the words of our Lord.
Good morning. Good morning. I am really happy to be here. I'm on, right? Yep. Good. Okay, awesome. I am really excited to be here. I just want to tell you, though, good news. Last night I sat down with Alan and on all 20 pages of my notes. And after a few words of godly wisdom, it's only 6 pages now. So we're good. We're really good. I'm really excited. I have to tell you, this series, God Talks, has been so good. It's been so good. If you've missed some of the weeks, I encourage you to go to the website, catch up on some of these messages. They have been incredible, and God has been speaking. And, you know, from the very beginning when we started talking about this, I don't know if any of you have ever been a part of or watched TED Talks, or anyone familiar with TED Talks? If you're in any type of corporate setting, you've probably watched a few TED Talks. I know I had seen a few through my job. You know, they're meant to really kind of inspire you and motivate you, and it's kind of where we kind of got the idea, you know, TED Talks, but guess what? God talks even louder. And so I hope that you've really been just taking it in and listening. And I love our tagline. It says, listening changes everything. Listening changes everything. So when we were kind of putting the the weeks together, Alan had asked if I would share one week, and I said, "You great." And of course, I go to a source of inspiration that we all have anymore, and that's Facebook. You know, the last time I was up here, I told you how I was inspired by those cooking videos. You know, and then I found the videos where they cook on the tiny little stove. Anybody seen those where they cook the tiny? I don't know why they do that, but it makes no sense to me. But I just catch myself watching them, like they're meaningful. And the other day, Mike and I were in a Sur La Table store, and I looked over, and there's a little tree with Christmas ornaments, and they've got little tiny pots, little brass pots hanging on there. I said, "Oh, hey, look, it's the little pots from the little tiny cooking show," you know? I don't know. Anyway, someone had posted this story on there, and I've heard it before, but it just kind of sparked something inside of me, and I thought, you know what, God, I want to use that story when I share your God Talk. So I'm going to tell you a little story today. I'm sure many of you have heard it. Maybe some of you not. Maybe it's new. If not, it'll just be a little refresher to you. Maybe it was like it was for me. So the story goes that one day a farmer's donkey fell into a well. Never a place any of us want to be, right? In the well. The animal cried for hours, and as the farmer tried to figure out what to do, finally he decided the animal was just too old and that the well needed to be covered up anyway. So it wasn't worth the effort to retrieve the donkey from the well. So he invited all of his neighbors to come over and help him. They all grabbed a shovel and began to shovel dirt into the well. At first, the donkey didn't realize what was happening and just cried horribly. Then, to everyone's amazement, he quieted down. A few shovel loads later, the farmer finally looked down in the well, and he was astonished at what he saw. Because with each shovel of dirt that hit his back, the donkey was doing something amazing. He would shake it off and then take a step up. As the farmer's neighbors continued to shovel and the dirt on top of the donkey, he would just shake it off and take a step up. Pretty soon, everyone was amazed that the donkey stepped up over the edge of the well and happily trotted off. Wow, good story, huh? Good for that donkey. He made it out of the well. Woo! You know what? Every one of us needs to hear that story. You know what? That there are times in our life that we find ourselves in the well. And not just in the well, but we find that there are people that are really not cheering for us to get out of that well. That they've resolved that it's really not worth it to go to the effort to get us out. You know, in the Bible, there's a story about a similar to this, not about a donkey, but about a young man by the name of Joseph. This is probably one of the most incredible stories in the Old Testament because it's really a story of just what we go through in life. And who knew that God would put something in the Bible that would help us in life? Wow, you know what? Reality TV is nothing new. Right here is reality. It's in the Bible. It's been happening for a long time. So we're going to go into the book of Genesis. And in the book of Genesis, there's a story about a family, and the father's name was Jacob, who had many sons. But we're going to talk about one son today, and his name was Joseph. And the beginning of the story happens around chapter 37, and the life of Joseph goes until the very last book of Genesis, which is the chapter of 50. But before we get into the story, I want to tell you a little bit about Joseph's family, because it really wasn't, like a happy family or a great family. So his father, Jacob, fell in love with a beautiful young woman by the name of Rachel, and went to her father to ask for her hand in marriage. And the father said, okay, you can marry her, but only after you've worked 7 years for me. Boy, that's a deal right there, isn't it? So Jacob works, earns the hand of marriage in Rachel. They have the great wedding celebration, and he's having some good wedding celebration fun when he wakes up the next morning to realize that the father-in-law had tricked him, and he didn't marry Rachel. He married her older sister, Leah. Now, that's one way to get rid of a daughter you can't marry off, huh? So here's Jacob. He realizes he's married Leah, not happy about it, goes back to the father-in-law, but it's already happened. The father-in-law says, tell you what, I'm going to let you still marry Rachel, but you have to work another 7 years. So he works another 7 years, marries Rachel, and guess what? They're one big happy family. You didn't know this, but here's the original sister wives, right here. You know what? There is nothing new in this world, is there? So we've got these two sisters who you know that this cannot be a good situation. And all of a sudden, Leah, the one sister that he didn't want to marry, starts having sons for him. And then we've got Rachel over here, the sister that he loved and wanted to marry. Her womb was closed. So you know that things were happening in that family. Not good things, but jealousy and rivalry. And so finally God opened Rachel's womb, and she gave birth to 2 sons, and the oldest was Joseph. And this happened in Jacob's when he was older. So Joseph was very special to him because he loved Rachel. And it meant something very special to him that God gave him a son through Rachel. So here we've got this family. So this already doesn't sound like a really great situation. Can you imagine Christmas and Thanksgiving around that table? Kids fighting, and it really wasn't a good thing. But this is where our story begins. So let's go to Genesis 37, starting with verse 3. It reads, now Israel, who had been known as Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made him a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Verse 5, so Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Now at this point in life, Joseph is about 17 years old. And he has this dream that God gives him. And I'm going to tell you what the dream was. I'm just going to kind of give you a scenario of it, just a summarize of it. He has this dream that he and his brothers are out, that they are out gathering grain, and they're making these sheaves of grain. And in the dream, all of a sudden, Joseph's sheaf of grain rises up, and the brothers' sheaves all bow down to Joseph's. So he tells his brothers this. And in verse 9, it says, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I've had another dream. And this time, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Wow. Bet they weren't so happy to hear that again, huh? In all his dreams, everyone's bowing to him. So here's what we know about Joseph so far. We know that his father loved him more than his brothers. We know that his father made him a coat of many colors, and this coat represented something. This coat was not something that his father dialed up Amazon and said, hey, send me one in a size medium. This is something the father made for him and gave it to him as a gift because he meant something to him, and this was a gift of sacrifice and a gift of love. So we know here that his father had given him this beautiful coat. We know that he was a dreamer. And we know something else. We know that he really didn't know when to keep his mouth closed, that he talked too much. I'm one of those people. I talk too much. Amanda is one of those people. She talks too much. Wonder where she got it from. And lastly, we notice here that Joseph is really unaware of the fact that his brothers resent him. Not just resent him, but they hate him. You know, a few verses later, Jacob sends Joseph to go and check on his brothers who were off tending sheep. And so Joseph goes in his coat of many colors to go find his brothers. And on the journey, he stops and he asks and inquires, where are they? And learns that they're in another location. So he's off to go find his brothers and check on them. Once again, unaware of the fact that he doesn't realize that his brothers hate and despise him. So his brothers see him coming, a ways off because he's got his coat of many colors on, and I'm sure he's pretty easy to spot. And in verse 18 it says, "But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. 'Here comes the dreamer,' they said to each other. 'Come, now let's kill him and throw him into one of these wells and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams.'" Poor, unsuspecting Joseph, just going along in his merry little coat, not realizing that just up ahead of him, that someone's plotting to kill him, that there's danger ahead. But the brothers decided not to kill him, but instead they put him in a well. They stripped him of his coat. They took the coat and they dipped it in blood of an animal and took it to their father and let their father believe that an animal had killed his son. I'm not really going to talk too much about Jacob today, but I want to tell you, Jacob grieved deeply for the loss of this son. He was to the very bone of him. He grieved for the loss of Joseph. So just like the donkey, Joseph finds himself in a well. From the story we see here in this well that he's there because his brothers despised him and they hated him. I wonder if Joseph was so busy focusing on maybe his coat, maybe the wind was blowing and his coat was kind of lightly just breezing in the wind, or maybe he's having a great hair day, or maybe he just felt good that his father had sent him on an errand, I don't know. But he sure wasn't focusing on the fact that up ahead his brothers were plotting to kill him. So all of a sudden he finds himself in this well. Proverbs 14:16 says that the wise are cautious and avoid danger, but fools plunge ahead with reckless confidence. The problem here is that we see Joseph showed insensitivity and immaturity when he told his brothers about the dream. The dream's purpose was to provide revelation and faith for the difficult future that was ahead of him. The dreams were not a reason to exalt himself over his brothers. He really wasn't thinking about his actions. He wasn't thinking about, I'm going to tell my brothers what God's just shown me. He wasn't thinking about how they felt. It's like him telling, hey, guess what? One day you're going to all bow down to me. Doesn't that make you feel great? Now let's go have lunch. He wasn't paying attention. He was being reckless. I would think that if my father had pulled me aside and given me this beautiful coat and said to me, "I love you, son. I love you so much more than my other children," that somewhere inside of him, this became like a confidence, or maybe it turned into an arrogance with him. Maybe he felt like, as long as I've got my coat on, nothing can happen to me because my father loves me more than you. Every time he put that coat on and those brothers saw it, all they could hear is that the fact that they knew their father loved Joseph more than them. And so at this time, Joseph could have been acting with this type of reckless confidence, feeling good about himself. I've got my coat on. I'm doing what my father's telling me to do, not realizing that there's danger laying up ahead. And then Joseph finds himself betrayed by his very own brothers. How could they allow their jealousy to turn to hate? How could they allow their hate to turn to murder? But that's what happened. They wanted to kill him. They may not have actually done it, but they lied to their father, and so according to their father, Joseph was dead. So they allowed their father to believe that something had happened, that his son had died. So these young men had plotted to kill Joseph. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. Even Jesus was betrayed by those that were closest to him. You know, we suspect in life that people are going to hurt us and people are going to do wrong to us. But it hurts so much deeper when it's close to us. And those are the kind of wounds, it's almost like it's a double-sided knife. When it goes in, it cuts, and when it comes out, it cuts. And it's never pretty, is it? It's never pretty. The thing about betrayal is that it's one of the most painful human experiences that we face. We find our innocence has been shattered, and we're left wondering what happened. How could this happen? Who is this person that I thought I knew so well? Not only was Joseph in the well, but he had been stripped of his identity. That coat had been taken from him. He had lost his freedom, his security. He had lost his innocence, and he found himself in the bottom of this well. I'm sure that a lot of those questions began to go through his mind at that time. What happened? Why didn't I see this coming? I didn't even know that they felt this way about me. So he finds himself in the bottom of this well, because sometimes in life we put our trust in the wrong things. You know what? For Joseph, he put his trust in that coat. That coat that his father had made for him and given to him, he had put all of his trust and found his identity in that coat. Not in who he was here, but he allowed that coat to become his identity. And you know what? We do that in life. We don't think we do, but we do. We put our hope and we put our trust and we put our identity in our job. We put it in our relationships. We allow our possessions to give us identity and purpose. And we're fooling ourselves if we say we don't. Because I know for each of us, when someone asks something about you, what's the first thing we tell them? We tell them something, oh, I'm married. Well, that's a relationship. Oh, I'm an HR manager. That's a job. You know, or I live in Terra Vista. That's a possession. That's how we identify ourselves. We don't identify ourselves by saying, oh, I'm a child of God. Or, you know what, I'm an honest person. Or I value integrity. Or I love volunteering. We don't find our identity in those things. We find it in our work, in our relationships, in the things that we own. Psalms chapter 20, verse 7 tells us that some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Well, for Joseph, it didn't end in the well. God had a plan. So now, when we go to chapter 39, we find Joseph as a slave in Egypt in the house of Potiphar. And I'm going to read you a few verses here. Starting with verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian, was one of Pharaoh's officials. The captain of the guard bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, I want to say that again, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing was upon everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Wow. It looks like here that maybe God had another plan, didn't he? And how we find Joseph as a slave. But you know what? We see him with success and things happening, things are going good. He's still a slave and he has a master, but he's been placed in charge of this household. And it just seems like everything he does that God is blessing. And Potiphar is recognizing that, you know what, this young man is blessed at everything he does. And so he began to, give Joseph more responsibility. But it wasn't to last. Because then Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of making advances to her and lied against him. And then Potiphar had him thrown into prison. So he goes from the well to being a slave to where now he's a prisoner. He's been thrown into prison for something that he didn't do. But chapter 39, verse 20 says, "But while Joseph was there in prison, The Lord was with him and showed him kindness and granted him favor with the warden. Wow, God was still with him. You know, this morning when we were singing that song, I know who goes behind me. I know who goes before me. The God of angels' armies is always by my side. You know what? For Joseph, it didn't matter if he was a slave, if he was a prisoner, God was still by his side. And while he was in prison, once again, you know, God begins to bless him and use him. And there was two of the king's, two of his servants there, the cupbearer and the baker, had been thrown into prison. Not the king, but the Pharaoh. Had put these two men in prison. And while they were there, Joseph interpreted their dreams. Now we know he's a dreamer, but now we're learning that he also interprets dreams. So he interprets the dreams for the cupbearer and the baker. Now the interpretation for the cupbearer ended up better than the one for the baker, because in the interpretation for the baker, he ended up dying. So I'm sure he wished he just hadn't asked Joseph to tell him anything, because it really wasn't good news. But all Joseph asked of the cupbearer, he said, just when you are released, just remember me. And the cupbearer said, of course I will, of course I will. Well, the cupbearer is released a few days later, goes back into Pharaoh's house, begins his duties again there with Pharaoh, and guess what? Joseph totally left his mind. 2 years later, Joseph's still sitting in prison, but God is still with him. And about this time, Pharaoh began having visions and dreams, and he began to call for the magicians and the priests and that, you know, anyone there that had any type of wisdom to come and interpret his dreams, and no one could interpret his dreams. And he was getting more and more frustrated and angry because no one could tell him what these dreams meant, because they were reoccurring. And so all of a sudden the cupbearer remembers Joseph, and he says, oh, Pharaoh, I know someone that can interpret your dreams. So they go and they get Joseph from the prison and clean him up and bring him before the Pharaoh, and he tells him about the dreams he's having. And the interpretation he gives him, he says that that there is about to be 7 years of famine or a feasting upon the land of Egypt. So for 7 years, there's going to be bountiful supply. The crops are going to be wonderful and grow, and everything is going to be great. But then there will come 7 years of famine. And so because of Joseph's interpretation, Pharaoh ends up placing him in charge of, basically, he was second command in the kingdom. So he's gone now from being in the well to being a slave to being a prisoner to now he is second in command in the land of Egypt. Wow. God did have a plan, didn't he? He did have a plan. So here he is, second command. You know, when he was sitting in that well, do you think he was thinking that that's what God's plan was? I think he was just thinking, am I going to live or die? You know what? When he was a slave, do you think he was thinking that God had a plan like that? I think he was just thinking about, am I ever going to be free again? You know, just when it seems that things can't turn around, God has a plan. He always has a plan. There are times in life that we can't see past the well. There will be times in your life you can't see past the situation and the circumstances that are happening in your life. But I want you to know this, that Austin said it so beautifully in his video last week in the God Talks. He said, there are times that we can't see what God's hands are doing, but we can trust his heart. And for Joseph, you know what? He didn't know what God was doing, but he made a decision to trust God's heart. In Deuteronomy 31:6, it says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified of them, for the Lord your God goes with you, and he will never leave you or forsake you. You know, in our little story at the beginning, I shared about the donkey. Something happened when he got quiet. You know, sometimes in life, our first nature is to just, I don't want to say panic, but we go into this mode of, I can fix this. It's not so broken that I can't fix it. And I can imagine that donkey in the well kicking and crying and screaming, or whatever donkeys do, ee-awing, you know. But you know what? When he got quiet, he began to realize what was really happening. He began to realize, hey, there's dirt happening around me here. This is not looking good for me. And you know, when he got quiet, he really started paying attention to really the reality that was around him. But something also happened in him. He made a decision that, you know, this is not going to be the end. You know what? This is coming at me, but you know what? I'm just going to step on it, and I'm going to climb up a little higher. You know what? In life, we want to fix things. We want to get out of our own situations. But there are times in our life that we cannot. And for Joseph, he could not get out of the situation. But instead, he determined that he was going to honor God, whether he was in the well, whether he was a slave, or whether he was a prisoner. And because he chose to honor God, what happened? God was with him, and God blessed him. No matter if it was good or bad, God was there, and he was blessing him. And he continued to prosper Joseph, even as a slave, even as a prisoner. You know, Joseph made a decision that he was going to honor God, and he was going to trust God. And you know what? Here's the thing is, if you continue to read the story, you see that God used Joseph to save an entire nation. That because of the interpretation of that dream and the understanding that God gave him, that he used him to lead this nation through this famine, that they didn't die, that they were able to survive this famine. What should have taken and wiped out a nation, God used him. So in the story, we find that during the season of famine, Jacob sends his other sons to go to Egypt to buy grain, because Egypt had the grain. So he sends them with silver and gifts to give in exchange for this grain so that they can live. And when they get there, guess who they have to ask for the grain? Joseph. But now remember, this has been several years. Joseph was 17 years old the last time they saw him, and now he's about 35. So they didn't recognize Joseph. He was not a young man anymore. He was a man. But Joseph recognized them. And this was his time, his moment. He could finally take revenge on his brothers. That's not what he did. You know what? The moment Joseph decided to honor God, he let all that go. He let all those feelings of betrayal go, because you can't honor God and hang on to hatred and hang on to revenge. When we choose to honor God, we choose to forgive, just as we've been forgiven. You know, the message of God Talks is very simple. Listening changes everything. You know, when we started talking about this, about 3 weeks prior, or 3 weeks after I'd kind of made the decision what I would be speaking on, I learned that I was losing my job due to some corporate decisions that some strategies had made, and it affected my position, and I was losing my job. Well, I have to tell you, here I am. I'm in my little well, and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? It's going to be fine, because you know what's going to happen? I'm going to have a job by the time I speak, and I'm going to be able to say, see, look what happens. It all works out okay. It's going to be fine. And I'm going to stand up here and I'm going to rah-rah-roo, you know? Well, guess what? I don't have a job. It's 7 weeks later, and I still don't have a job. And, you know, I have to tell you, I put my trust in that job. I found my identity in that job. And it's taken me 7 weeks to realize, you know what, that job was not my identity. You know what, that job doesn't put inside me purpose. That job does not let me know I'm loved every day. He does. And so a couple of weeks after I had lost my job, and I've painted everything I can find in the house and rearranged and cleaned and had a yard sale, and Lauren came down one weekend, Zach's girlfriend, and I don't know, for those of you who don't know, she's an artist. And so she came in my office one day, which I'm sitting there. I don't know why. I guess I'm trying to find a job or something. And she comes in and she says, I just felt led. I made this and I wanted to give it to you. And I was like, okay, you know. I'm still at this point of like, I've got it figured out. And she hands it to me, and it's a little thing she drew. And it says, be still, my heart, and know. So I took it and I set it right on my desk so I could see it. And I was like, that's really sweet she did that. how sweet. That's honestly, that's what I thought. That's really sweet. And I just kind of I don't want to say discarded it, but I just felt like this. I know God, but I can figure this out on my own. And, I just felt God really check me and say, Michele, I need you to do two things today. I need you to be still, and I need you to know. I need you to just be still. I need you to shut the computer. I need you to quit making phone calls. I need you to quit reliving everything that's happened. I need you to quit talking about the fact that you feel like you were wronged and how that these people have wronged you and everything that's happened. I need you just to be quiet and be still. And I need you just to know this. I am God. I am God. Michele, I have gone before you and I've gone behind you. I'm standing right here beside you, and I need you to just be still and know. I'm going to tell you something, a little secret about me. I'm a little hard-headed. And it takes me quite a while to surrender. I was sharing with the worship team this morning that about 6 weeks ago, I was having a lot of trouble with my neck and my shoulders. I went to see a doctor, and so they had recommended I have like a massage to try to loosen up some of the tension I was feeling. And so the guy that's doing the massage, he's like, okay, I just need you to relax your arm. And I'm like, okay. He goes, okay, I can see you're a helper. You just stop helping me here and just relax your arm. And I was like, well, I did. I relaxed my arm. He goes, no, I don't need you to help me here. And I thought to myself, oh my Lord, I can't even relax. Like, I'm got to help the massage guy out here. It's like, what is it about me? You know what? We do a good job of hearing, but we don't do a good job of listening. Hearing happens here. It happens right here. God gave us these 2 ears that we hear with. But listening happens here, and it happens here. Because listening is when we really take what we're hearing and we start applying it to our life. So a couple weeks later, I'm in the car, and I'm still, okay, I know, I got to be quiet and I got to know. But it still wasn't sinking in. I heard it, but I wasn't listening. I'm in the car, and it just looked like that day. Every prospect of a job I thought I had was like, no, or just silence, nothing. And I was just in the car, and I'm like, God, what's going on? Like, what, why can't, what, are you not hearing me? I lost my job, right? And I'm just at this point where I'm feeling this overwhelming feeling of anxiety. Now, I don't know how many of you out there are type A, but if you are, you know what I'm talking about. Because it's that feeling of panic where it's like, I can't fix this. I've kind of run out of options. And I just remember I was in the car and I'm crying and I'm just kind of giving God, like telling him what I need to say. And all of a sudden I just stopped talking, and there was a song on the radio. And I couldn't even tell you who sings it or the whole words, but all of a sudden all I heard was these words, just breathe. Just breathe. I need to get one of those watches like Jake has that tells me just breathe. You know what? Those are designed for type A personalities. Just breathe. Like God saying, come on, just breathe. There's ones that says, just be still and know. But here it is. You know what? I just thought, okay. I just stopped. I didn't say anything. I just took a few deep breaths. I was like, okay, I'm going to be still. I'm going to be quiet. And I'm going to know that you are God. That you are God. That you have been behind me, that you've gone before me, and that you're standing right here by me right now, that you are God. In the story of Joseph, things didn't get better after he got out of the well. Things got harder. But God had already spoke to him, and he had heard it. He just didn't listen. But he started listening. And when we start to listen, things change. Maybe not in the way that we want them to change. And I'm going to tell you something. Where I really have trouble listening is because I'm afraid if I listen, God's not going to say what I want him to say. And that's hard because his ways are not my ways. His ways are much higher. And he sees from this perspective that sees from beginning to end, where all I can see is right now in this moment in this well, and it's dark, and I'm surrounded by doubt and fear, and people have taken away my identity. Everything that I thought I was good at, I'm doubting it now. And that's where I'm at right now. But you see, he's not seeing just the well. He's seeing behind me, and he's seeing ahead of me. And that he's got this great plan. And you know what? When Joseph, I feel like when he came out of that well, he's like, you know what, God, I don't know what's happening. I'm really at this point, I'm out of control. And I don't have my coat anymore, so I don't even know, no one even knows that my Father loves me more. But you know what, God, I'm just going to honor you. And you know, when his brothers showed up that day, and it was a little bit of a process, and I encourage you to read the story this week. It's a beautiful story of just forgiveness. And, you know, when his brothers came back, and you know, Joseph, you know, they came to him, they were afraid, and they knew what they had done was wrong. Joseph said this to them in verse 20. Actually, I want to back up one more and go to verse 19. He said, it says, Joseph said to his brothers, don't be afraid. And then he asked them this question, am I in the place of God? I'm going to say that again. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God has intended it for good. You know, I really thought a lot about that question. Am I in the place of God? You know, Joseph realized that God had a bigger plan, that it wasn't about the well and that he got out of the well. It wasn't really about being a prisoner and slave, that God had this better plan. He had a plan. And the most important thing was, am I in the place of God? And I want to ask you this morning, are you in the place of God this morning? Are you in the place of God? You know what? Each of us have our own set of circumstances. Look, I don't know what's in your checking account today. I don't know what bills are stacking up. I don't know what your job situation looks like. I know what mine looks like. I have an interview on Tuesday. But I have no promise of anything except for the fact that I'm in the place of God right now. And you know what? That's exactly where I need to be, in the place of God. I'm going to ask the worship team to come, and as we prepare to just take a moment to go and just seek him, I just want to ask you that question. Are you in the place of God this morning? I know life gets discouraging, and maybe you feel like you're in the place of that well, that you've been stripped away of your identity, of your security, your innocence. Maybe you're feeling betrayed. Maybe you're just kind of feeling lost. I want you to know this morning that God is still God this morning. He's still God. Let's stand this morning. And as we get ready to go to prayer, I want to tell you something. I know this. I don't know what's ahead of me. And I don't know what job lies ahead of me, when or where it will happen. But I do know this. I know that God's already there. And I don't know what's happening in your life right now, but I want you to know that God is already there. And our job is just to be where he is. And if it's here right now, I'm here. If it's over here, I'm going to go. God, I want to be where you are. And this morning, I'm going to ask, the prayer team to come. And, all of us need that moment just to admit, you know what, God, I can't get out. God, I'm really kind of at the end of my rope. But thank God we're at the beginning of his. And I just really feel led this morning that God wants to speak something to you this morning. And maybe it's just breathe. Maybe it's just a message of, hey, just stop trying and just breathe. I've got this. You know, Nick said it in his message. God reminded him, I've got this. I've got this. And as we go to prayer and they begin to sing, I want to encourage you to come. You know what? Nothing is too small for God. Nothing is too great for Him. And whatever you need prayer for this morning, I want you to come. And just come, you know what, saying, you know what, God, it's yours. You know what, God, I don't care what the world throws at me. I know that you're here with me. And God, we're going to step up and we're going to climb a little higher this morning. I'll tell you, that's what, when we give it to God, that's what we're doing. We're stepping up and we're climbing a little higher. We're saying to the enemy, you have intended this to harm me. You have intended this to destroy me. But God says, I'm about to turn it around for your good. It's time to step up and climb a little higher this morning. Lord, we thank you this morning. God, as we come to you, Lord, we come to you with hands raised, God, because we surrender to you. God, we do not have the answer this morning, but God, you do. And God, as we just give our hearts to you this morning, God, I pray that you would come. And God, that you would remind us, Lord, that you are still God this morning. And God, that you have not forgotten us. God, that you have not forsaken us. God, that this situation in my life does not rattle you because you are God this morning. And God, I pray that you would come in a way, God, that just breaks us free. God, that breaks us free from the doubt and the fear. And God, of the situation that surrounds us, God, to know, Lord, that you are here. And God, that because of you, we can step up and we can climb higher. God, that we can reach you. I just pray, God, that you would come in a mighty way. God, that we would know you this morning. As they sing, I want you to come this morning. I don't care how big, how small, God wants to meet you this morning. It's time to step up and let God just have his way this morning. Praise you, Jesus. Praise your name, oh God.